This week on Personally Speaking, the great actor Jose Llana is our guest. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and actor and singer Jose Llana joins me now. Jose is currently starring as Ferdinand Marcos in the Broadway musical Here Lies Love. He most recently starred as the King of Siam in Lincoln Center Theater's Tony Award-winning revival of The King and I on Broadway, the United States National Tour, and the UK Tour. Jose's previous Broadway credits include the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Wonderland, and Flower Drum Song. Appearing on numerous cast albums, Jose, a native of the Philippines, is also a best-selling recording artist on the Viva Philippines label. He's here with us today to talk about his life, his career, his family, playing Marcos, and the faith and values that mean the most to him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Jose Llana. Before we get to our interview with Jose, let's listen to him singing from Here Lies Love.
We have waited so long, now a change will come soon. And if you put me in charge, hey, well that's what I'll do. Help me out, fellas. I am a child of the Philippines, from Cagayan to Lake Cebu. And this is our land.
First things first, I want to first of all welcome you to the program. Tell me a little bit about why is this Here Lies Love so incredibly popular? What do you think it does or says that makes people so into this musical that it's been around forever and now it's so popular?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess, people are attracted to a party. It looks like a party where,
Right?
the images we're showing. I think the curiosity from what people are hearing, how we've turned a Broadway theater into a dance floor and disco, I think. But I think hopefully why people are spreading the word about us is that it's a combination of a big party, but also giving a little bit of important history lessons about
Yeah.
what could happen to politics and world leaders if we don't keep watch over them. So,
Recently at church, I was talking about 9/11, and I was troubled by the fact there were some young people who really didn't know what I was talking about.
oh wow.
So that's 2001, but I'm thinking, so a revolution that took place in the last century is probably easily forgotten. So for the folks who don't know,
Absolutely.
you are playing Ferdinand Marcos. Can you tell us who he is?
Well, Ferdinand Marcos was a former president and dictator of the Philippines. He was elected president in 1965. And in the middle of his second term, he started trying to hold on to power. And so he actually declared martial law in 1972. And he stayed in power until the People Power Revolution took back power and ejected him and Imelda Marcos from the palace in 1986. So he was in power for about 21 years in the Philippines.
Jose, did that experience of Marcos's dictatorship,
Mhm.
what role did that play in your family's decision to leave the Philippines and come to the United States?
Enormous.
Okay.
I mean, it was the main reason. I think, I was born in 76, 4 years after martial law was declared. My sister was born in 72. My parents were the young activists in the 70s who were the ones that we actually depict in our show, the young student activists who were rallying against obviously martial law and trying to regain freedom back for the Filipino people. And there came a point in time where my mom and dad had two young children, and they realized that any opportunity to immigrate to the States was high on their list. And I think there was a massive exodus of the Philippines around that time because martial law was such a dangerous and terrible time for the Philippines. It's the reason why I'm in this country. It's the reason why I'm an American citizen.
Right.
The same for many Filipino Americans who immigrated not just to the States, but to Australia, to the UK, to Canada. You can trace a lot of Filipino immigration to the 70s and early 80s while martial law was happening in the Philippines.
I could ask this about the people from the Philippines, but actually, it's a universal question. Some people still think the world of Marcos because they like
Mm,
the image of the strongman. There are certainly
hmm
people who put Mr. Putin on a pedestal in the same way we have our own strongmen here in America. Do you have any
hmm
idea about what it is like when you guys, not you, but the people in the Philippines elected Duterte? He just seemed like not a good strongman, and yet he was very popular even among the Filipino community in New York. A lot of them said, no, he's going to clean up the crime and going to make us
hmm
strong again. What is it in our human nature that makes us be attracted to people who clearly don't have democracy in their hearts?
Right. You, I think in both instances, I think in particular, there was a level of misinformation happening. And I think, back before social media existed, one of the first things Marcos did was he kind of took control of journalism. He
Mm,
basically imprisoned a lot of reporters and journalists, and he controlled the narrative of what his country, of what his administration and who the people he was in charge of were doing. So there was also a class system where obviously the wealthy elite, they had more of an idea of what was going on in the main capital, but there were a lot of people in the rural parts of the Philippines in the 60s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who, a lot of them didn't have television. A lot of them only had the radio, and a lot of them only had the news that was being brought to them through the newspapers. And so they were being spoon fed misinformation about what was actually going on. Travel 50, 60 years in the future, the same thing is happening with social media.
yeah.
Social media right now in the Philippines, and actually Maria Ressa describes it perfectly in her book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, about how Facebook has completely overtaken the news cycle in the
Mm,
Philippines because Facebook is free, because anyone who
yeah.
has a Facebook account will get their information primarily from Facebook sources. They don't necessarily check the source that their news that they're clicking on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
So, Cambridge Analytica did a huge study on the engagement of Filipinos, and then you couple that with the fact that martial law has not been taught in public schools in the Philippines for the past 30 years. It's been kind of glossed over. Then you have two or three generations of young people who are
Right.
now voting age, who have not been educated about what martial law was and all the civil rights abuses that happened. And so when you have Marcos's son come up and say, "Hey, I'm running for president. Remember martial law? It was a golden time of the Philippines,
Right. Right.
and I'm not gonna grant any legitimate journalist interviews
Wow.
until I'm elected." And you really start adding up that the fact that misinformation is really helping getting people to the decision of, well, let's give Marcos another try, since his father looked. I mean, some people were telling me that the Marcoses were the golden age of the Philippines based on all these glamorous photos. And so in our show, we tell the whole story of, yes, there was glamour. That's the party we're throwing, and it was the party that the Marcoses threw in the Philippines for 20 years. But the most important part of our story is that last third of the story where you see the torture, you see the dissolving of democracy, and then you see the people power revolution taking that power back. And hopefully our show is telling people that while democracies crumble, that you still have the power to take it back if you as a people want it back.
There's something that happened in the people power revolution back then that just
hmm
never could happen in America. There's a priest I live with, Father Andy, who's from the Philippines, and he talks about it because he participated in it. But the church, the Catholic Church,
hmm
was thoroughly behind the revolution, and Cardinal Sin stood up to Marcos. But that kind of
hmm
thing just couldn't happen in our country where the church would ever have that kind of political influence. What is it about the Catholic Church in the Philippines that gave them the ability to motivate people to get out on the street and end this dictatorship?
It was such a huge part of the revolution. It was you can't understate the power that the Catholic Church has in the Philippines. Obviously, it's part of the Spanish culture that came to the Philippines when we were colonized in the 1500s. And I mean, to be Filipino means to be raised Catholic,
Yeah.
obviously, because it's such the. And so when the People Power Revolution started happening, the image of the nuns coming out and
Mm,
joining the protest, and then the priests coming out to join
yeah.
them, it became such an iconic figure of image, that it brought more people out to the street, and
Hmm.
said, and it was also a really, I truly believe that it was one of the main reasons why it was a completely peaceful protest, because nobody in their right minds would ever raise a
Yeah.
gun to a nun or a priest, especially knowing that there were cameras everywhere and taking photographs of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it was a big tipping point, I believe.
Hmm.
Usually because the church tends to stay out of politics when they can, and as they should when things are not going well. But at this point, it was such a tipping point, and I think when the people who had, if the Marcos government, the dictatorship was really unpopular already at that point. But once the Catholic Church came in and joined the protest and said, this is enough. And obviously, they had been saying it for years beforehand when it was widespread and understood that there were a lot of people being taken and tortured and
Mm.
killed, and which obviously goes directly
Yeah.
against the teachings of the Catholic Church. So, I think you can't understate how important it was. Like actually, in my dressing room right now, there's a really popular and very famous image of three nuns kneeling,
Oh,
Filipino nuns kneeling in front of a tank, in front of soldiers with guns,
amazing.
and it was such a strong image that I believe Time Magazine put it in their paper. And yeah, I mean, I think you can't overstate how important the Catholic Church was in the forming of the People Power Revolution.
Jose Llana, great actor, is our guest on Personally Speaking. Jose, I had the privilege years ago of interviewing Cory Aquino, and what struck me about President Aquino was how forgiving of nature she was.
Mm,
They had killed her husband, for goodness sake, and yet
mm,
talked about reconciliation and forgiveness at the heart of our faith and hopefully our government.
mhm.
Is she typical of a Philippine mentality of forgive and forget, or do people hold on to the anger?
I would have to say she's much more in keeping with kind of the general feeling of the Philippines and
Okay.
Filipinos. But I say that with reserve in that it's a bit of a warning. I think I've constantly started um, reminding people that we have been colonized so many times by other
Yeah.
countries that
Yeah.
Filipinos, we tend to be the masters of assimilation. We tend to be the
Mm,
people who, okay, I guess we've been taken over by the Spanish. We weren't really a country before the Spanish came. We were 7,000 different islands and tribes trading with each other with different languages. But now they've come and called us Filipinos after King Philip of Spain,
hmm.
and they've given us a religion that we didn't practice before they got here,
Right.
and they've named us these Spanish names. So I mean, like all these things happened that the Filipino people we've learned to kind of assimilate and move on and move forward.
Hmm.
And I believe that to a fault. I
Yeah.
really do, because I think once the nature of a people is about overcoming the bad situation to try to make the best of it, there comes this feeling, this kind of colonial mentality of make do with what you got and make do with what you're given. And I think what was happening in the 60s and in the 50s and 60s was that Filipinos were finally claiming who they were and trying to overcome this colonial mentality of first the Spanish were in charge and the Japanese threatened us, and then America came in and said you're free from the Spanish, but we're still kind of in charge
Yeah.
here.
Right.
And I think that was so that when you had these politicians like Marcos come in with this nationalistic pride and say, we are Filipinos, we will
Hmm.
stand up to America. That's why he was elected with such popularity. It was a landslide victory.
Yeah.
Now, if only he had fulfilled his promise to be honest and true to the Filipino people, as opposed to becoming corrupt by his power, which is exactly what happened. And I think um, the potential that Marcos had was so huge to bring the Philippines into a new era, and it is absolutely heartbreaking that he decided to go the other
Yeah.
direction and pillage the country and steal and kill. And so, yes, Corazon Aquino, I think, has the reputation for being, well, let's forgive, and being that president after Marcos was kicked out. There
Yeah.
was a need for the country to heal, which is
Hmm.
what we needed from her and what we needed for the country. Unfortunately, I believe it allowed for the corruption that still existed in the country to keep spiraling into more corruption that still exists today.
Okay, let's talk now a bit about you as a person. There are
Okay.
so many wonderful American Filipinos, and they do great stuff. Every doctor I go to, every nurse I run into from the Philippines, they're great, great people. But I mention that because you decide somewhere along the journey of life to go into the arts. Now, I just
Mm,
wonder, with your own parents,
Mm,
nobody minds their child being into the arts as an avocation, but a vocation, a life
hmm
choice, very indefinite. You sometimes work, sometimes you don't work. So, how
hmm
did your family respond to you embracing a life in the arts?
with full support, but that
Okay,
it comes. I have to. It comes with two different things.
sure.
My mom and dad, who are incredible parents and very progressive, and they came here to this country looking for better opportunities for themselves and for their two children. It goes without saying that my mom and dad would have supported anything that I did.
Okay.
That said, I benefit greatly from being the younger sibling. I have an older sister Patricia, who is my hero and my idol, and she benefited. Well, I would say she had the unfortunate duty of being the older sibling, and my sister was a rock star in school. She got straight A's. She got a full scholarship to undergrad at college, engineering scholarship Cooper Union, and then she got a full scholarship to grad school at MIT. So, and now she's an engineer for the US government.
Amazing.
So my sister is a rock star, and I think because she did everything you were supposed to do as a young immigrant child. It allowed my parents to go, okay, Jose wants to sing and dance for a living. Patricia has fulfilled our immigrant dreams for having an engineer in the family. Let Jose, and I truly believe that if had we been born in different order, I might be an engineer and my sister would be dancing on Broadway. I really do. But I owe everything to supportive parents and also an older sister who, to this day, is my idol and hero.
Okay. Now, Jose, we had on a few years back, obviously before she went to God, the great novelist Anne Rice,
Hmm.
and Anne had come back to the church, and she'd been an atheist for a while. Then she became a practicing Catholic, but she also had a son who was freely, openly gay. And I
Hmm.
asked her during the interview, I said, "Look, how do you square the fact that where the church is on the issue of gay, and you have the son who you love, but you also say you love the church?" And she said, "Well, you just said it all, Monsignor." She said, "I love my church and I love my son, and it's quite
Hmm.
comfortable being both." Um, Now, in this age of Pope Francis, where he goes to Chile and meets with gay men and says, God doesn't care if you're gay, the Pope doesn't care if you're gay. All that we care about is you live a good life, a meaningful life. That's a huge, huge, huge
Huge.
step in the right direction. But you
Hmm.
grew up in a time when the church was not always that open minded. So,
True.
how do you, as a Catholic Christian, how do you put it all together?
I believe I constantly, rather than trying to ask the big questions,
Yeah.
in terms of the big questions,
Right.
as a gay man, I think of when I think of the Catholic Church, I think of my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
I think of my parents, and I think of as the relationship I have with them, and I know my grandmother my, there was never any doubt that when I came out of the closet, I was very young. I was 17 when I came out. That was 30 years ago. Um, I there was never any doubt that my family would be supportive. But I just knew that it would be something we'd have to talk about, and
Yeah.
it was the reason why I don't consider myself a practicing Catholic anymore when after I left, when I came out of the closet. Just because at the time in 1994, it wasn't where it wasn't where I felt comfortable.
Yeah.
But only in my older age have I realized just that I am a spiritual person and that I yearn for something to feel there and to understand there.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the peace that my Christian friends have when they do talk about their faith and they do talk about their connection with God. Um, so I applaud that any notion to bring people together and to talk about faith and to talk about what it means to us to be spiritual. And again, my grandmother's turning 100 next year, and she's in the Philippines, and unfortunately, obviously, she's not traveling anymore. So we're going
Yeah.
to try to go to make her 100th birthday next summer to the Philippines, and I just know that she prays for me every day, and there's something about that is really special to me, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's a bit of one of my superpowers that I know that my grandmother is still praying for me, and she knows, and I know that she's praying for me that I'm happy and that I'm healthy, and
Yeah.
that to me is just special, and I think about that every day.
When you go back, will that have been the first visit in a while to the Philippines?
Since 2008. Yeah,
Whoa.
unfortunately, to
Okay.
get there, you have to take at least 2 weeks time. And my husband and I, particularly my husband, it's hard for him to take 2 weeks time to go. 'Cause to go to the Asia for just 1 week is a very difficult thing. You basically spend 2 days flying there and 2 days flying back. So But 2008, we went to a wedding in the Philippines. My cousin got married, and that was a really special time. So it's been a while. Actually, unfortunately, we had a huge family trip with my sister and the kids, and my mom and my stepdad were going to the Philippines, a planned trip in March of 2020
Uh,
that we canceled.
we know what happened, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it was heartbreaking. We had all the trips, we had all the tickets purchased and planned, but obviously we had to cancel the trip. And so this is the next reason for the reason for the trip will be next summer, probably.
Now, Jose, let me ask you: when you are going back to the Philippines to see Grandma
Mhm.
for her 100th birthday, and this time you're going back where the president of the country is the son of the
Oof.
dictator, and now you who play the dictator are going to the Philippines. Are you going to be
Yeah.
warmly welcomed there?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's just say I will not be coming in with a fanfare. Let's just say that I will
yeah,
not be
yeah.
going in any official capacity with the show. I will try to be incognito, saying I'm there on my own personal, there just to visit my family. And yeah, people keep asking, will you do Here Lies Love in the Philippines? And I said, us doing the show here has this, not just the safety, but the also the privilege of being told from a Filipino American perspective what we know as our history, what happened back in our country of birth. But to tell the story there, obviously, is a very different story. There are a lot of people who don't want us to talk about martial law. There are people who, and I don't just mean the people who are Marcos supporters, but I have to have a lot of empathy for the people who see martial law as a really traumatic time of their lives and of the country's life, and it's hard for anybody to talk about trauma,
Hmm.
whether and I think the important thing is to talk about it because we don't want the mistakes that were made back then to happen again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important part of telling the story. But I think there's this beautiful safety in telling the story from a bit of a distance from within the Philippines itself.
Jose is our guest, and Jose Leama. Am I saying it right?
I just say Lana, Jose
Lana.
Lana.
Oh, Lana.
Yeah, it's easier. Like
We
that's the
have
colonial mention. That's the colonized mind of
they
just trying to
got to
make it
you,
as
huh?
simple as
They
possible. Yeah,
got. We
yeah.
had recently on Paolo Montalban, and he's playing
Hmm.
Florence Ziegfeld in Funny Girl. And I asked him the question I want to ask you. We've come a long way since Miss Saigon and an Englishman playing an
Hmm.
Asian, and there are many more roles, thank God, for Asians now. But uh, is there a danger in saying only people who are what they are can play the role?
Mm.
Could you play a role right now that would normally be played by someone of another culture or background or color?
Um, I think to make a blanket statement for all art right now would be
Right.
is a dangerous thing, and I think
Yes. Yeah.
it's like all art, it's subjective, and number two, I think that decision should be made piece by piece and show
Okay.
by show. I think, in my career, first of all, I love Paolo. Paolo and I have been friends since our first Broadway show together in 1996. Not only is he incredibly talented, a strapping, handsome guy, he's one of the kindest people
He
I've
really
ever
is.
known.
Yeah.
He just, his heart is about this big, and he
Yeah.
wears it on his sleeve, and he's just the kindest guy on the planet. But Paolo and I did a show on Broadway in 1996 when it was there. During that time, I remember auditioning for things and being told straight to my face, "We're not seeing Asian people for this
Oh.
show." And they were completely in their rights to say it that way. And it
Yeah.
was a different time.
I promise I'm going to wrap soon, but let me ask you this.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
when when I listen to someone like you, and you probably know this about yourself, you are Jose, very upbeat, very positive. Um, when you look at the world, though, America and the rest of the world, we are so divided. It almost seems like evenly divided, one against another. Uh,
Hmm.
are you a person of hope, and do you have hope for the world and our country in the future? And where does the hope come from?
Absolutely, I have hope. My hope is, we live in these big bubbles, and we look at the world sometimes from only the perspective of our bubbles. And I think it's a lesson I learned from social media. I'm 47 years old, so social media came a little late to me. I got too engrossed in it, and I got very angry, and I'm very
Mm,
political, so I responded really quickly. But these past 5 or 10 years, I've learned to step back a little bit and
okay.
and be more of a watcher, and let myself engage without thinking first, and letting a day pass, or even an hour pass, to let the anger subside, or let the reactionary emotion subside, and go, okay, do I still want to respond? Will my response mean anything in a positive way, or am I just adding to the negative discourse? Am I just, this person is clearly putting this out there to create negative discourse. Do I want to add to that? So I think if we all just step back a little bit and took a breath, because we are surrounded constantly on social media with people who don't agree with us, and people
Right.
who have quintessentially opposite worldviews that we do, and people who are trying to take our rights away.
Yeah.
Rather than going in with an angry heart, I always try to step back and go, okay, what has this person lived through? What is their experience to get to this point? And where can we find common ground to understand that we're all just here trying to do the same thing? We're all just trying to live peaceful lives and hopefully coexist with each other. And if there still isn't a connection, then that's okay. It's not meant for me to connect. I walk away, and maybe someone down the road will find a connection to that person. But I've learned to walk away, and I've learned to really only try with people who I feel like are going to try back,
Yeah.
and make that connection. So you have to, or else you'll just go into a downward spiral every time someone
Right.
upsets you. But I do hope that, and I feel it's like sincere hope that if more people entered things with that kind of empathy, then the world would be a better place.
Many years ago, I had interviewed the film director Frank Capra, who said illness is not as great a problem as discouragement. I just wondered, when you got the election results, that there was yet another Marcos as president. Did you respond with hope or with discouragement?
I responded with worry that my parents were going to get very upset by it. They were the young kids, they were the young college students
Yeah.
that saw it all happen, and they're in their 70s now, and they're both retired, and I just feel like they're exhausted from it all. I think there comes a point in your life that you just kind of want to relax and not think about politics, and but I think about them in that sense, and I think, okay, let me take it. Let me take on the worry and understand what we need to do to make sure that things don't happen the way that they did in
Right.
1972.
Jose, thanks so much
So
for being a guest on our program. And, I listened to you talk glowingly about your sister. Obviously, your parents are so proud of her, but I suspect they might be mildly proud of you too.
I hope so, and I'm sure they are. Thank you so much for having me on.
As we end today's program, I thank you for being with us. If you need to reach me, you can get me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to not just listen to this program, you can also see it on YouTube by going to Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.